Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's special webinar event on data and Kubernetes. My name is James Green. I'm going to be your moderator for today's special event, which is sponsored by Portworx by Pure Storage and produced by Actual Tech Media. Before we get into the meat of the webinar today, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping things with you quick to make sure that you have a great experience. First of all, I want to make sure that this is a very interactive event where you can ask questions and we will respond to you. So I want to encourage you to ask all the questions you've got. If you look in your attendee console, you'll be able to find a questions area where you can submit those questions. If you can't find it, look at the doc at the bottom. It says Q&A. You can ask that question, and myself, as well as the experts that you're going to be hearing from shortly, will be monitoring those questions. And we're going to take them as much as we can throughout the course of the event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end where we can take as many questions as we have time to get to. So if you've got a question, somebody else probably has it as well, so make sure you just pop that into the questions pane so that we can tackle it. Second, as I mentioned, there is a handout section. And in that handouts pane, you'll be able to find some great stuff that you can grab and take with you. There are case studies to help you understand how what we're going to be talking about today has helped other organizations like yours. There's an analyst report that walks you through kind of how to evaluate your situation and how this discussion will relate to you. And then there's a paper there to help you kind of understand and articulate the business value of what we're discussing. So I would encourage everybody to access those now and take a copy with you when you go, share it with your friends. You just hit view on the handout there and it'll open a pop-up and then you can download it from there. Third thing is at the end of this event, we're going to be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee. Of course, you must be live in attendance today to win, or to be eligible to win, I should say. And if you have any questions about eligibility or how the prizes work, if you look in that handouts pane I was just describing, if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link to Actual Tech Media's prize terms and conditions. So any questions that you've got about how that works, you can probably find the answer to there. Finally, one more thing I want to let you know about. I talked about how important it is to ask good questions during this event. I think that really, really increases the value that you get from being here. And if everybody's asking good questions, that increases the value collectively, like for all of us. So it's worth spending some time to think about what questions you have and pop them into the chat. To help encourage you to do that, we've got a special prize here for the person who asks the best question on the event. We're going to send you a $50 gift card. So after the event is over, our team will download all the questions that were asked, probably hundreds, and we'll go through those. And whoever has just, the most insightful or interesting question that we think is adding value to this discussion, we're going to send you a $50 gift card. So hopefully that, if you were on the fence about whether or not to ask your question, hopefully that convinces you to do it. So that's all the housekeeping. I'd like to introduce you to your presenters for today, and we'll let them get into it. So you're going to be hearing from Chris Saunders, who's a cloud architect at Pure Storage, and John Owings, Director, Cloud Architecture at Pure Storage. These guys are experts. They've been in this industry for a long time. They spend all day right now thinking about the kind of stuff that you're going to be hearing about soon. And so we're really fortunate to be able to have them here and just kind of tap into their expertise. So Chris, John, thank you for being here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us on. I'm super excited to share what we have today and kind of the entire premise of the smartest thing you can do is move your data into Kubernetes now, or K8s now. So let's just get started and we'll just roll from there. All right. So there's no cloud native presentation that is complete without like showing the landscape, and I'm going to show it a couple times.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna zoom in too, so because I know no one else can read this. but that's the point, right? And this was back in 2017 when I first started getting involved in running containers. Chris may have been at either Red Hat or VMware at the time, and getting involved in this same type of field as
Red
well.
Hat. Yep.
Kind of led us down this road. And from this, right, from even this was just shortly after Kubernetes was starting to really come onto the stage in the container orchestration world, is then to now, right? And the point, right? What is the point? Is that it has exploded over these last couple of years, like 5 years now. I can't believe it's been that long already. But the amount of projects and pieces and parts that could be in there, it could be quite daunting to log in and take a look at this, right? And then you get to the part that I care about, which is data services. There's databases and streaming, things that handle or manipulate data that are built or run in containers. Not built for, some of them, are older than me, and some aren't, but some are brand new. But all of them have something to do with, like, hey, we're housing data, we're allowing you to use it or take advantage of it in some way, shape, or form. And if we look at kind of the timeline over the last almost 8 years since Kubernetes got open sourced by Google and then eventually rolled into the Cloud Native Foundation, is that you see along the way is that there was that first, there was entry, there was a lot of stop and start when it came to using data inside of Kubernetes, to the point where, like all this extra complexity started coming in. If I hit next, a couple times, there we go. And, we see all these things that came on, like CSI drivers and different platforms. And one of those that, that's obviously near and dear to my heart and Chris's heart is Portworx, which was, came out of stealth in 2017. And it was eventually acquired by Pure, and customers and people like you on the call are, wondering, they started using Kubernetes and they started putting databases in it way back then, right? Learning, finding out, what was good, what was bad, and all those things. And at the same time, there was kind of the original users or the original people in that kind of released Kubernetes, the experts, right? We'll put them in quotes. You should not run stateful data. And
remember back in the day, it was containers are ephemeral, right? We don't put data in containers, and we had that whole movement where we had that ill-advised moment where we all had a slide that said pets versus cattle and all that good stuff. And containers were just things that would disappear and we shouldn't care about them.
Exactly. It was like part of the 12 factors or something, right? But people still did it anyways. That's why I mean, you could tell that this is not a marketing slide because it looks like I made it. And it says, watch me, right? A lot of people over the last 5 years said, no, there's a reason why I'm using this platform. I want to orchestrate it. Why, what motivated all these people to ignore that and start putting data in there and kind of going through the trials and tribulations over the last 5 years of, how storage should work. And a couple examples before we kind of get too far deep into this is, one that if you've followed Portworx or Pure Storage over the last couple of years, you've probably seen this logo before. But T-Mobile, they use it across their enterprise, on-prem and in the cloud, all kinds of places. And I mean, here's the reason, right? It took them from 6 months for a new app to hours, right? And that is a big enough draw where people are going to say, you know what, maybe I can find a way to make Postgres work in here, or I can make Cassandra work in containers. I need the same orchestration and management platform to manage my compute or my ephemeral apps and my stateful apps. And another example, because I like to give lots of examples, right, is Roblox, right? They not only did it for their encrypted volumes to be able to provide security that just are not things that are not built into Kubernetes by default, but also to be able to scale, right? When they were faced with everyone's kids being sent home March of 2020, that's something that that happened back then, and everyone signed up for Roblox because they were stuck at home. And they said, if we didn't have containers and we did not have Portworx, we wouldn't have been able to scale to handle basically about a year's worth of new users all in that month of March. And so that is why. This is two data points, but we have dozens and hundreds of customers that are doing the same thing over this last 5 years. And that's why we have this platform that we built, right? And it is a, you may hear people call it like a data management platform or a data platform. What Portworx is your production survival kit. If you want to get into production with Kubernetes, you need Portworx, right? And it's more than just, hey, do you have a backup plan? Which is one thing a lot of people forget. Chris, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but and he's going to demo it in a minute. But like, do you know how to back up? And that's completely different from when you did VMs or when you did just database dumps, right? But then
you're not there yet. You'll get there for sure. And we see it every day talking to customers where, we tried to back up the way that we're doing our VM backups. And it's not the same, because once you restore that VM that may or may not have the pod that you're looking for in it, now what? Or you restore a VMDK. And so backup is one of those crucial elements that tends to be overlooked as you start, moving down the path. And maybe it has to do with like the speed of adoption, right? Because customers tend to kind of start early and they build a platform, and then developers come trampling in with all of their needs. But yeah, we definitely see this over and over again. You definitely have to think about how backup plays into your containerization strategy, your Kubernetes strategy.
And that's just one point, right? There's different parts here. So PX Backup as a product, we could talk later. You can ask questions about it, but as an actual solution, right? It's part of this whole suite. But licensing, whatever, we can talk about how those are delivered. But the other things you're thinking about as you want to get into production are DR. Backup is great when I need to go back and get something that a restore from yesterday. But what if I need to fail my business over, and how do I do that, right? Or how do I migrate from Red Hat OpenShift to Google Anthos, right? Like all those things that are kind of the promise of containers. Like, hey, all those apps should be portable. They should move around. But when you tie data to them, we have to have a platform that's built for that. And it has to be built for containers, and it has to be built to move that and treat that data in a way that is application centric. You may hear me say that one or two more times today, but things like security, autopilot is, a product name, but that really is, it is like, I'm trying to think of the best word. It is auto capacity management for Kubernetes when it comes to storage. So you think if anyone's familiar with, just the cloud or Kubernetes, like having auto scaling groups where, hey, if my CPU load gets to a certain amount, make me more VMs, make me more nodes to handle XYZ, right? We do that for the data level. So like, hey, if I am almost full, or if I need more in my pool, or if I need to rebalance across new types of storage providers that are in the cloud, I need to move from GP2 to IO1, or, one of those things. That's what's going to do it, right? It's auto capacity management. So you get out of the game of managing that, and you let the monitoring systems do it for you. Let's see if there's anything to add to that, Chris, before we go on to the next one.
Well, I think, yeah, that the auto capacity management kind of fits in that same bucket as backup, where it tends to be one of those last things to kind of think about. And you have let's say you have a database where you have this fully integrated stack of applications that ends in a data store of some sort. Maybe it's Mongo, maybe it's Postgres. There's PVs, there's volumes that are backing up that data store. And if you don't have a strategy for doing automatic capacity management, automatically scaling out those PVs or scaling out the storage that is behind those PVs, often those apps will fall over, and I've seen it. I talked to a customer just a couple of weeks ago, and they were troubleshooting issues with their applications, and what they didn't realize, because they just weren't considering it, was that they hadn't turned on automatic capacity management. They hadn't gotten to a place where their volumes were automatically scaling out, and Mongo was just falling over because the volume was running out of space, right? And so it's definitely something to think about. And I think we have, as you've said here, right, a production survival kit. So as you move into production, there's all these concerns that you have to think about now, bringing data services into Kubernetes that we're looking to resolve or help you with.
Exactly. And in kind of the end of that, right, the end goal is to deliver these services, right, which could be any of these logos on here. Is I want to be able to deliver databases. I think that what we aim towards as, DevOps teams or SREs or platform teams is providing a way to provide these services to where now the people that consume them, the developers, application architects, they're not going, well, how do I build a storage class to have resiliency across availability zones in the cloud, right? I use as much jargon as I can in that sense, right? We want to be able to have that built in, and that's what we aim to deliver is the high availability, the cross AZ kind of failover between clusters, stuff that for data driven applications is just not there when it comes to these clouds, right? Where if I want to take these, they can run very well inside of a container host or very well inside of a EKS cluster or Openshift cluster, but to be able to span that or fail it over to another one, doesn't exist. It had to be added, and that's what we've done. And because we've taken care of like kind of the hard work on that part, now you could focus on delivering these data services and doing it in a way that solves a lot of these problems. So
yeah, and I think like one thing I would add here is that so my background is infrastructure. I spent a lot of time running infrastructure on the customer side and certainly supporting infrastructure solutions on the vendor side. And I think there's a tendency on the infrastructure side when you look at these solutions, and I have customers that will say, well, we're going to go to the cloud and we're just going to use S3, and so our developers will not put any state in containers. But we've definitely moved past that point, because developers are building, as you build an application, and maybe there's some developers on the call that can relate with this. As you build your application, you tend to now have the ability to actually create a data store that matches the data structures inside of your application. So maybe I pass a lot of JSON around inside of my application, so I want a JSON-based data store. It just makes things simple for me. Or I'm a particularly efficient developer, let's say, and so sometimes if I'm building something just off the dome, I might just find something that just has the easiest driver to implement, that works the simplest, and that I can understand the quickest. So developers are coming to the table, and it's not the way IT kind of used to be, where they are forced to pick from a set of standards that IT has developed. In some cases, and maybe in your environment you might have that, but primarily what's happening now is developers are building a stack of their application includes the data store, because it makes sense to have a data store that matches, again, the data structures inside or is efficient for their application. And so if you don't see these data services inside of your environment today, you will, because they're right now it's on a developer's laptop, and that application is either going to make your business money or save your business money, and it's coming to infrastructure near you. So all of that to say, if you think that you can kind of push developers into using a solution, and that you're going to keep data out of state out of Kubernetes, it's not going to last for long. You're definitely going to have to get to a place where you are managing these data services, and you want to, because you want developers to use your platform. You want to embrace that. You want to help them accelerate what they're doing, as opposed to try and build standards that are potentially not consistent with what they want to actually accomplish.
Exactly. And as we kind of move into this is that, people over the last 5 years or so have discovered, like we were mentioning earlier, there are some catching points when it comes to managing this. And, what do we do to answer these? Like, I'm not going to read each one to everyone, but and everyone can read the slide, is that how do I answer all of these struggles, right? How do I get that into a way to make it transparent to the end user and also make my life easier? Because I always, as like Chris said, I was a VMware admin long ago, and I would always find ways to help, automate and make things easier for me. That would always be a benefit, right? So I like to be home, and I don't like to be up all night fixing problems. So how do we get past that? And at what layer do we solve these problems, right? Chris, do we just push it on the developers, right? Like, I think that's the answer for some, right? Is
12
they should just build that into their app,
right? Yeah. Yep.
Just build that into your app. Like, you want availability, you just do it yourself, right? That's not going to happen. There's a lot of MariaDB and Postgres out there where, it may be a single instance that runs a single, set of database, right? Some tables that they use, and, they're not going to just pick that up and, rewrite it into some massively distributed database, right? So how do we answer that? What layer do we do it at the data center level? There's all kinds of things to consider. And to finally finish the timeline, because I love timelines, because I don't know, just the way I think, I'm very linear, is, to add on is, as those data services, as our customers came to us at Portworx and said, hey, we are struggling we need to migrate. We need to have something that can orchestrate the storage to be able to make sure that the nodes are the closest to the data, for performance reasons or availability reasons. We started adding these things starting in 2017, cloud drives and migrate and all these different services, to the point where now, over that timeline, we have this, something I'm going to hint at here is Portworx Data Services, where we've taken all those, everything we've learned and all these different features that were built into Portworx Enterprise over the last 5 years, and kind of packaged that into a service. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a second, because you can go back to 2017 and you could use our product. You can take advantage of all the different acronyms and things to use up here on the top of the timeline, like PX Migrate and Stork and Backup and all that. Or, we can, if I can hit next one more time, go right to the finish line. That's what Portworx Data Services aims to be. So, and I feel like we're moving towards seeing large parts of production stateful apps running in K8s, right? By 2024, we're going to see a lot more of this, and it's going to be more of a standard, and this will be something we talk about every day, and it's time to kind of get ahead of the curve while we can. So how do we expose that to developers, right? We build services with Kubernetes. We allow the app team to build with whatever service you have, right? MySQL or different Python libraries, whatever you're going to use, that runs in the control plane. And Portworx provides that data control plane. It runs within a container. It's something that can be managed by the platform team, and then automates interactions with the infrastructure team. So there's still a place for everyone, whether it's in VMs or physical servers or in the cloud. That platform works in concert with Kubernetes as scheduler and for compute, and now we're able to match those data services everywhere. You want to add anything to that, Chris?
No, that's absolutely. I think as you start to think through where we can solve these problems, how we're going to solve them. I think I like the next slide, maybe because I made it, but the idea that one of the ways you can start to solve these problems, certainly when you have Portworx at the table, is just with a storage class. So for those of you that are already deep in Kubernetes, you know what a storage class is. If you're not quite there yet, This is a way of defining how you're actually going to store volume. So an application is going to come into Kubernetes. It is going to request storage. One of the ways it requests storage is, a definition that would include, storage class. And so this is a storage class that uses the Portworx provisioner so that we're dynamically provision storage. We're all past that point where, originally in Kubernetes, we had to actually manually do that provisioning. That's done, right? We're doing dynamic provisioning here. And we can actually handle things like availability encryption, RBAC, and actual capacity management, all now in the storage class. So you can provide developers with a storage class that gives you all of those capabilities, and it's completely transparent to them. They don't know, they don't need to know, they don't care. Now they're storing their data in a way that is consistent with your standards or your best practices inside your organization. And literally it's a few lines of YAML in a storage class that you've defined. And so we think this is a great way to start down that path and provide many of these capabilities and solve some of those problems that we were talking about earlier with Portworx, and just define how you're going to kind of solve them. And as you move into these other cloud environments, because many of the customers that we talk to on a regular basis aren't just using one cloud. They have multiple cloud environments. Although I don't talk to many customers of Linode, but I love Linode. That's why I put their logo on this diagram. But lots of customers have a multi-cloud strategy, includes on-prem and includes multiple clouds out in the public cloud sphere. So maybe you're using Azure, AKS, EKS, a mix of all of those things. Now you can create one storage class that uses Portworx, and that you can use the same storage class across all of these different environments. So Kubernetes is the dial tone that we work with. And so those challenges that we've solved, again, you've solved it in a storage class, and it's a storage class that's applicable across all these different zones. You've solved it once, and now your developers just get to keep on keeping on, and you get all of these benefits. We did talk a little bit about backups before, and this is actually the UI, and you're going to see more of this UI in my demo in a few minutes. But we think, in the backup space, this is something to think about is like, what if you can just provide user managed backups? Like you want to turn this interface to the developers and give them the opportunity to define and manage those backups, because once you start to operate at scale, you're going to have a multitude of namespaces, a multitude of clusters and applications, and you're going to either need to define a group that's actually going to manage this, or turn it over to the developers and either give them a UI like Portworx, like you're going to Portworx backup, like you're going to see in a minute, or turn them loose on the API to actually define these backups. So now, if you think about that diagram of all the things that we're trying to solve, we can help you solve the backup solution here, PX backup, in one place, part of the same kind of portfolio. What am I missing there, John? Anything?
No, and that kind of goes. There was a question in the Q&A, and I just marked it that we were going to answer it live, and this is part of it. So you also, for Eric, who asked that question, when we get to the demo, you'll see a little bit more about how to save and deploy the backups. So this is one portion of that, and
I've got one more question. Maybe when you do the demo, you'll answer this, but I'm wondering if there's kind of a in between. So Chris, you were saying, do you want to control it, or do you want to turn this over to the developers? And I'm wondering, maybe one of those options is the perfect one, but since this isn't the perfect world, is there a way to sort of have a happy medium? I'll maybe try and articulate that better during the demo if I see a spot where it would come up, but I'm wondering, is there a fallback? If you say, I'm going to turn it over to the developers the way you described, can you set some sort of global policy that says if they don't do it, at least get it once a month?
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is I think the balance that you're talking about there is probably in building out policies. So maybe within PX backup, and you'll see it in the console in a couple of minutes. Maybe within PX backup, you set your access so that really what you want is dev teams or application teams or business units that are responsible for the applications to have access to start a backup or check the restores or check that a backup has actually run properly, but maybe you want to actually set the policy, right? Because you're the storage team or you're the backup team, and you need to actually make sure that you know what the policies that are consistent with your security policies and internal archival standards. So yeah, there's certainly the ability to build out the policies and then even create the jobs and then dole out access, standard kind of RBAC control stuff, and say, okay, well, here's how a user can potentially access this, and decide how much access you want to provide and where. So there's definitely a balance, and every customer, one of the things that I've found, certainly talking to customers about their Kubernetes deployments, like everybody's a little bit different. The industry, we haven't really decided as an industry on, is the SRE team responsible for all of this? Do we have an SRE team? Is it the DevOps team that's responsible for it? Does the storage team take over the backup piece? And we're all still kind of figuring it out. And I find every customer is a little bit different. So I think PX Backup is powerful in that way because you have the ability to define RBAC controls and define who has access to what and customize it to what you need in your environment.
And that actually kind of leads into this next little portion, next like 2 or 3 slides, is that what if you could do that one click? And so, James, what we would build there is with, this is leading towards Portworx Data Services, is these templates that have that policy built in. So this would be a dashboard with, deployment of data services, like where now, instead of going in and tweaking the YAML, and making sure I apply a backup policy to every single app that I deploy or something like that, I could then just go to a dashboard that is, has all the RBAC controls in it, where I see only my clusters as a customer, and I say, give me a Redis instance or give me MySQL, and all of the backup policy, the high availability is built in, which is what the point of Portworx Data Services really is that, and I meant to take the build out of this, so let me just build it all the way out, is to now allow you to deliver these services and, more than just deployments, is have that day 2 ops, right? Have the stuff that comes after, monitoring, scale, lifecycle management built in. Right. And so now from the developer standpoint, I'm not having to worry like, okay, well, what kind of backup policy do I put in this? Do I still need to do SQL dumps? Do I still need to dump the data? Yes, maybe. Right. And so we've built that in over basically taking the knowledge from learning from our customers and some of the things that they've built on their own, and being able to have that built in, right? Where now, my administrator sets, so you get, small, medium, large, Cassandra, and each one has its own different settings for a backup, right? Or a snapshot or anything like that. So, and yeah, so, and it obviously uses all these tools, these pieces and parts of Portworx Enterprise underneath, right? Still delivered as like a pay-as-you-go SaaS service, but now I can say, I can get out of the game of worrying about, did I create the right storage class, right? Which you could still do, and we're going to have customers do that on their own, because this right now, we're going to launch maybe 5 or 6 data services in this and add them as they go, but you may have something else that you want to run, right? And so you'll still have to know how to do that, but more and more so, you'll see that we'll have the knowledge built in. So now that you can do that, you can just say, hey, give me Cassandra or Postgres or Zookeeper and Kafka, which I've learned in the last couple of weeks kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, so those things, you have that in there. You have application aware, like I told you, I would say that again, backup and restore, those types of things right there. Next. Maybe, there we go. And what's the alternative, right? And here's kind of the reason why we built it, because we had customers with data architect teams or DBA teams for each of those logos that are out there, or, you know, they have one for the cloud database systems. Like I have someone that's really awesome at DynamoDB or whatever. And then I have a Postgres person and a Couchbase person or team. And when you're rolling those into Kubernetes, each one has its own operator. Each one has its own API, right? So we were able, the real goal of PDS is to bring that all into one place. So now that you don't have to hire hundreds of DBAs that all are very specialized in a certain app, right? Now we can have one API, one UI for everyone to interact with. And let me check while Chris, I think, will show us a demo of enterprise, backup, and PDS. I'm going to look at the questions, make sure we answer all these.
All the things. All right. So let me just take you through. We talked about most of these. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. We checked it out ahead of time, so we should be good. This is a little sneak peek. All right, perfect. Little sneak peek of PDS, and we'll get into this in a minute, Portworx Data Services. But I just wanted to skate very quickly through Portworx Enterprise and just give you a bit of a sense of what that looks like. So in my environment, I actually have Openshift running on vSphere. And so, you know, many of you, I'm sure, are running Openshift. So here it is. It's running in a vSphere platform. So these, I just have three worker nodes, 3 master nodes running in here. And, you know, installing Portworx in an Openshift environment in particular was super easy. I went to the operator hub, which is taking its time right now. But I searched for Portworx and I saw Enterprise and Essentials here. And in my case, I installed Enterprise. You can see it's listed as installed. That installed the operator right away. And then after that, I installed the storage cluster. This is all in our documentation. And it deployed into the environment. And one of the nice things about, I talked to a lot of customers that are running on-prem and they're running some Kubernetes distribution, typically on a virtualization platform. And typically it's vSphere today. And one of the nice things that Portworx can do in virtualized environments as well as in cloud environments is actually manage the underlying storage. So in my deployments, I actually told Portworx that it should actually deploy a number of disks. And so you can see, you know, in this UI, it lists the number of disks attached to the virtual machines in vSphere. And this 120 gig disk was actually attached by the operating system. So that was the template. But Portworx actually created these other 3 disks. And so when I installed Portworx and created the storage cluster, Portworx went out to the vCenter API and said, hey, I need some VMDKs. Now, the parameters of those VMDKs, what data store they sit in, how big they are, those are all things I controlled as part of the installation process. But so I added it to the configuration of the storage cluster, and Portworx just automatically built it. And off it went. And then Portworx is running inside of the environment. So my little environment here with just 6 nodes, 3 masters and 3 worker nodes is here, and you know Portworx is running here. And once we're actually up and running, I can actually just check the status of the cluster. Don't worry too much about the commands here. You know, if you're interested, you know, definitely talk to your partners or your peer reps or ping us, and we can take you through it more. But this is just saying, just to show you that Portworx is running inside this environment. I'm actually, the 2 disks that we just saw, or 3 disks technically, right? 2 150 gig disks are now part of the capacity available to store volumes. And this 3rd disk is actually for KVDB. So it's our key value data store that's kind of internal. And remember, we were talking about storage classes. When you install Portworx, you actually get a bunch of default storage classes. And so, for example, in this environment, I have a PXDB storage class. And in this particular storage class, it has a couple of interesting parameters. So there's a ton of annotations here. We'll just kind of skip by that. But the parameters here, I draw your attention to. So I've got IO profile defined. And so that means that this particular storage class has a profile that is specific for, it's optimized for databases. And that's a way to tell Portworx, hey, this is going to actually be a database. And so you should handle the IO a little bit differently. But also I've got replication factor equals 3 here for this particular storage class. And so that means that anytime an application deploys a volume that uses the storage class, I will replicate it across 3 separate Portworx nodes in the environment. So that means Portworx is handling that replication. You don't need to worry about it. Portworx has it covered. If there's ever a failure in your environment, then you have 3 replicas of that particular volume ready to go. Yeah, so that's just a quick, very quick drive-by to kind of show you what Portworx Enterprise kind of looks like. Would like to actually get into PX Backup. So I have a very small environment here that has PX Backup installed, the latest version. And you can see pretty simple UI. I've got 2 clusters here, the prod environment, the disaster recovery environment. And Portworx Backup here is actually set to talk to some backend storage. So when you install Portworx Backup with a Helm chart, you'll log in as admin, you'll set up your credentials there, and then start your whatever integration is appropriate for you and your user authentication mechanisms. And then you want to add a place to actually send your backups to. So PX Backup works by taking snapshots, and those are either cloud snaps from Portworx or CSI driver snapshots if your CSI driver supports it. And so we need to send it to an object store somewhere. So it's probably no surprise that we have a lot of pure storage in our lab environments. And so this is actually talking to a FlashBlade. So you create your account to authenticate to the backup location, and then you add the backup location, and then essentially you're ready to go. Now there's a lot more to the solution here, but I'm just giving you kind of the highlights. So once I've actually configured the attachment to a particular environment, now I can actually define a backup. So if I want to take, say, this Nginx namespace as an example and back it up, I can back up all resources by default, or I can actually pick the resources that I want to back up. So I might not want to back up the whole kit and caboodle. Maybe I just want to back up a particular volume. And so I just want this PVC. I can certainly do that. If I choose to leave all resources checked and click backup, well, now I have an option to actually run the backup. I give it a name so I can find it later in the list of backups or potentially search for it. I tell PX Backup where I want to send it. And if I'm using a CSI driver that supports CSI snapshot classes, I can add a CSI snapshot class here. So Portworx Backup actually works on any CSI driver that supports CSI snapshots. We do also work, very closely, obviously, with Portworx Enterprise, and so there's some efficiencies there in terms of how the snapshots work. But for the most part, if you're running, as long as you're running a CSI driver that supports snapshots, we got you covered. So I can choose to back up now. I can choose to back up on a schedule. If I click schedule, I pick from one of the policies that I have defined in the solution. So is it an hourly backup, daily, et cetera, all that good stuff. Included in the schedule policy is things like the roll-up schedule, like how many incrementals before a full, and all of those great things. And PX Backup gives you the ability to add pre-exec rules and post-exec rules. So that just means, is there anything that I want to run before the backup runs and after the backup runs? And the sky's really the limit here in terms of what you might actually want to do. So we provide those capabilities. We call that 3D snapshots. And if you want to add labels, because in your workflow, labels make sense, you can certainly add labels to your backups. I'll very quickly touch on the restore process, and then we're going to take a look at PDS, which is the new solution that we are introducing later this year. So this is a backup that has already run. And I should mention that I'm an administrator in this console, so that means I get access to absolutely everything, right? As I mentioned before, there are RBAC controls here to skinny that down. If you need to have specific users only have access to specific features, functionality, or clusters, we can provide all of that. In this case, I have a backup of the IPAM namespace. You can see here. And when I click on the backup, I get all of this detail about what's there. And I really like that I can see right away like which volumes are backed up and how big they are. But I can also see the other objects that I'm backing up. And important to note that PX Backup doesn't just cover the volumes. It does whatever Kubernetes objects that you want to actually include in the backup, right? So from here, I can actually hit restore backup. Again, I can give the restore a name because I might want to find that later. And I choose the cluster that I want to actually restore to. And this is important because you don't need to necessarily restore to the same cluster that you back up to. So I have customers that want to use this to potentially restore to test environments, dev environments, environments where they need to analyze, past results or do forensics, as well as kind of the standard backup and recovery stuff. So I picked the cluster I want to restore to, and again, I can choose what I want to restore, which of these objects I want to restore. And if I don't want to restore to like the same namespace, I can actually do a custom restore, and I can choose to actually restore this into a separate namespace, because maybe I already have an IPM namespace there. And I can select the namespace that exists in that cluster, or I can just type in IPMDR, and PX Backup will create that namespace and restore everything in there. There is also this very dangerous box at the bottom that is replace all existing resources, and that does exactly what it says on the tin, but be very careful there. But hey, yes, Chris. Sir.
Yeah, there was a live question about backup. I wanted to see if you could address it right here. Is how does your solution outperform the storage backup provided by AWS for EKS? I think there's some key things that we do different, that if you'd like to share on that, because I think it's just snapshots, right? The way that they help you back up EKS PVCs is just like a snapshot engine. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. But I think we certainly have a more robust console here. And I should mention that there's an API behind all of this as well for every feature and function. Because of our approach to kind of the UI elements here, yeah, again, I mentioned the RBAC controls that you can add here. We can integrate with whatever mechanisms for authentication. We do CSI snapshots, and then we actually will send those to an object store of your choice. And so that's the mechanism that we use. As far as performance with against EKS, I haven't measured specifically as far as backup and recovery. I'm not sure if the question is about can we back up or restore faster, or do we have more features? I'm not sure what you might be looking for there. So if you want to elaborate on that question, feel free to drop it in the chat there.
We'll keep going.
And while we wait for that, I'll give you a very quick tour of Portworx Data Services, or PDS as we're calling it. So PDS is in beta right now, and we have some customers that are already testing it out. It will be GA later this year. I'm not sure if we're cleared to give any sort of rough timeline, but it's coming. It's coming soon. So I'm actually logged into the console as an administrator. And the best way to think about PDS is it's a SaaS-based database as a service console, I guess. So this is a SaaS-based solution. You buy a subscription, and you have access to the console, and then you add your target clusters, and then you can build your catalog of services that you want to deploy to your cluster. So in this view, what you see is immediately the recently deployed items. So these are the data services that have been deployed in our environment. This is a shared kind of beta environment that we use internally. And from here, I can actually deploy data services, but I'm going to hold on that for 1 second and show you a little bit of how the sausage is made, and we'll go from there. So if I click on Cassandra, and right now in this environment, we have Cassandra, Kafka, and Zookeeper as the 3 flavors that we have. And so I click on Cassandra, and what I have is now a list of all of the Cassandra deployments that I have. I can see what versions, where I've actually deployed it, the namespace I've deployed to, date, et cetera. And I can click on this neat little metrics icon that gives me information about the environment. So I can see for this particular deployment, capacity utilization, throughput, and latency. And if I had the data in this environment, this is a dev environment that we test things out in. So there's not a whole lot of workload, I guess I should say. But you can see lots of information about what's actually happening inside of the environment from here. Now, these deployments are actually driven by the configuration of the deployments. And so if I click on the little gear icon, it takes me into a couple of options, right? My deployment targets. These are the clusters that are actually added. And so the SaaS-based console actually connects into your Kubernetes cluster. This CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution, we support it. So you connect your cluster in. So these are all Portworx clusters for Kubernetes clusters that we have added. And then you can define your data services here that you want to actually deploy. And so as I mentioned, right now we're supporting Cassandra, Kafka, Zookeeper. That list is going to grow for GA. If I click on Cassandra, this is the fun bit, right? So this is how you actually build your service catalog. So the resource settings template's pretty easy to reason about. This is, think your t-shirt sizes, right? I think is what we normally say now in catalog terms. So how many CPUs, how much memory, how much storage. This is an easy way to define how you're going to deploy this thing. And the application configuration templates, you know, if you're not a developer, if you don't work with these data services, this might seem a little bit strange, but typically these are parameters you want to apply to the actual operation of the service. So like a good example here is with this Cassandra deployment, the heap sizes. I want to define the new the size of the heap that I create on when I run, and then the max heap size. So I can only ever get to 1.2 gigs here, right? So you can add as many of these as you would like for each one of your options, and then your users get this option when they go to deploy. So if I click on the deploy data services Cassandra option, now I have an option to give it a name. The target I'm going to select here is one of the deployment targets that were added earlier. The namespace I want to deploy to. So in my environment, this is my cluster, our cluster that my team manages. I created this namespace, PDF deployment. I can actually select from the templates, and these are the templates that we just saw, right? The default application configuration. And if I don't remember what that is, I have this handy little ID or show details button so I can see what's going on. I pick the template size, and this is the medium and default we were just looking at. The number of pods, so maybe I want to scale this out right at deployment time, or maybe I just want to start with one. And then the storage options in terms of what I want to deploy to, and away I go, and off it goes to get deployed. This is a beta version, so you know, ignore the couple of pop-ups here. This deployment's gonna roll on and do its thing, but I think we need. This is probably a good place for me to stop, take a look at questions, and see where we are in terms of time. So I hope that was useful. We kind of went at a blistering fast pace, but hopefully it gives you a flavor for what we're up to with Portworx Enterprise, DX Backup, and Portworx Data Services. I need to find our console so I can stop sharing. All right.
Chris, thanks for blazing through that. I want to take some questions here, but acknowledging that we're coming up on time, and I know maybe some people will have to jump because they got to get on to the next thing. I'm going to quickly give away the gift card, and then we'll hang out and take some questions. Today's $300 Amazon gift card is going to go to Naveen Yaram from Virginia. Naveen, our team will be reaching out to you to deliver that gift card. Congratulations, and thanks for being here.
Congratulations.
Folks, if you got to go, totally understand. Thank you for being here. We're going to hang out and take questions for a couple minutes here for as long as John and Chris can stay and do that. Before we get into those, I see you had one more slide. Do you want to hit that, or should we jump into the questions?
Go right to the questions.
Okay, cool.
It's just a summary.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, we have a bunch of good ones here. Let me look at which of these we haven't already hit. Okay, so let's start with this one because I was actually having this question too. I know that you guys have an infrastructure background. What is the level of Kubernetes expertise required to run PDS? Like if I'm maybe coming from more of a data background than per se a Kubernetes background, will I be able to use this thing?
So it, like, from the data standpoint, the data user, you don't need to know anything about Kubernetes, right? To install it, you bring your own Kubernetes cluster and you install an agent, right? So that once that agent's installed, any DBA or data architect or somebody like that could log in and deploy and use their database, and they don't have to have any special knowledge of Kubernetes. That's one of the big upsides of it. It's a database as a service, and I mean, it uses Kubernetes and Portworx underneath, but you don't have to be, the day-to-day user does not need to know anything special on it.
Cool. I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna jump back to a slide here. Paul has asked a question, basically, where are the edges of this thing from especially I think from an infrastructure standpoint, and this is where I was kind of seeing an answer to that question, but do you want to kind of describe, like, if anything jumps to mind that it's not going to do, you still need to handle that elsewhere, or maybe it's surprising that, oh, and it does this too. Anything to help describe the boundaries of where this solution lives?
And maybe Chris has a couple other things to add to it, but my opinion is, from the data standpoint, it's fairly end to end, right? Like, I'm trying to think of anything that it leaves off from the, interacting with physical storage. So that would be that bottom infra portion that you're looking at on the slide where it says VM, physical or cloud. Like, it automates all that for you. So it talks to the cloud and gets EBS volumes to create its pool out of all that fun stuff. Where you're going to see where, we don't, like, hey, we can help you fail over. We can build the DR plan, but you still need to know something about your edge load balancing networks and DNS and all that stuff. We're not rewriting DNS records for you or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say around performance in a similar way, right? Like, you're going to need to know how your applications, what your applications care about, and how the data services might need to be configured. We've laid bare kind of all the knobs and dials and buttons that you might want to use to tweak performance, but you're going to want to know, like, very simple things like, hey, Mongo's caching algorithm or caching tool doesn't like, it likes only specific file systems. Like, you can't have an ext file system. It needs to be a XFS. So things like that. Like, you do need to still understand your application and how to actually manage performance. Again, we have all the capabilities there for you, but you need to actually understand how your applications work to make sure that you can build for best performance.
Got it. Robert asked at one point which services are included, and I remember this slide here from your deck. Is that an accurate representation of what you were saying is going to be GA at some point?
So this is Portworx Enterprise.
All those?
Yeah, this is Portworx Enterprise is actually a bundle of everything but PX Backup. So that whole data platform is Portworx Enterprise, and you get Autopilot, PX Store, a lot of those pieces. PX Backup, you actually don't need Portworx Enterprise. Like, you could use it to back up NetApp Trident volumes if you have that, right? It can back up anything. From the Kubernetes standpoint, it can back up anything that's connected to Kubernetes, but obviously they all go together very well as well. Did I answer the question?
I remember, yeah, I think it did. I remember a longer description of the items on the left side of the circle, PX Store, Secure, and Migrate. I don't think you said quite as much about. You want to just maybe in one sentence say what each of those things are?
So PX Store is the distributed file system that all this is based off of, right? PX Secure is the ability to either do RBAC or encryption or both based inside of Kubernetes. So I can encrypt the volumes in flight / at rest, where you manage the keys. And then, did I say Migrate? Did you say Migrate? And Migrate is, think of it almost like a storage live migration for Kubernetes. That it takes all the app with it, so you can say, hey, I want to move my MySQL database to this other cluster, and it moves it. I know that was more than one sentence.
Very cool. But... No, that's perfect. There's a couple questions about basically greenfield deployments versus folding this into what I'm already doing. So can you speak a little bit about especially the brownfield scenario? Like, is it possible and wise to move things we're already doing into the platform?
It is very much possible because it runs as a container. I mean, it's kind of segregated from other, like if you're running some other storage provider or, something like that, they can run alongside each other. And then you can migrate stuff into it if you'd like to. Of course, it makes for a cleaner demo when we do POCs and demos. Having a fresh new cluster always is nicer, but absolutely it works fine being installed in a cluster that's been up and running for a while, as long as it meets the requirements, which are pretty broad for us. We support lots of different flavors of Kubernetes.
How does somebody go about licensing this when it's time?
So it's two ways. So Portworx Enterprise is priced per node, like basically storage node, like node that has the storage portion installed on it. And then there's obviously some different things around pay-as-you-go. It's more of a cloud-like operational model where you can just pay for what you consume. Then PDS is 100% that model where it's based on the amount of databases you have deployed. So, and that's how it consumes it. And that's how it bills to the license. Of course, if you want to buy upfront, that's when you get discounts and all that stuff.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that you guys have hung around extra to tackle some of these questions. One more for you before we go, and then we'll wrap it up. If somebody has been watching this presentation and wants to get a closer look, what would you recommend they do next?
A couple things. So I would say a good place to start, just to see the documentation and even download the trial version of PX Enterprise, is you go to central.portworx.com and you can sign up there and you can actually get the 30-day trial for either backup or enterprise. If you're really interested in the Portworx Data Services portion, reach out to once it GAs, there'll be a sign up thing, on Central. But if you're interested in now, or you're like, hey, maybe I want to get in on the beta, find your local Pure Storage or Portworx team. If not, you can, find me or Chris on anywhere, LinkedIn, social media platforms. We can definitely help you out.
Okay, cool. Well, with that, on behalf of the entire Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank you, John and Chris, for putting together this awesome presentation. I had fun. Hope you guys did too. And I'd also like to thank Portworx for making this event possible. It would not be possible without Portworx's support. And last but not least, thank you everybody who's been here today for attending. I hope you had a great time. Thank you for your great questions. As a reminder, we'll be going over all of those and reach out to whoever had the best one to give you a little thank you gift card. That concludes today's event. Thank you for being here. Have a great day, everybody.